Hey listeners, welcome to Crime Alley Documentaries, where we dive into the stories behind the headlines, unravel myths, and uncover the truth lurking in the shadows. Today, we are revisiting one of the most infamous murder cases in American history, the story of Kitty Genovese. You might think you already know it. The woman brutally attacked while 38 of her neighbors supposedly did nothing to help. But what if I told you the story everyone's heard, the one taught in psych classes and retold at countless dinner tables, isn't exactly the full truth? To start, let's dive into Kitty's past. Catherine Susan Genovese, aka Kitty, was born on July 7, 1935 in Brooklyn, New York, to American Italian parents Rachel and Vincent Genovese. She was the eldest of 5 children. The family lived in a brownstone residence at 29 St. John's Place in Park Slope, populated mainly by Italian families. But after her mom witnessed a murder on the street, the family moved to New Canaan, Connecticut. However, Kitty, who had just graduated from high school, decided to stay behind with her grandmother because she was planning her wedding. She was marrying Rocco Anthony, an army officer and engineer who she'd been dating while she was in high school and he was in college. The couple went on to marry on October 31, 1954, but the marriage was soon annulled because Kitty was just realizing that she was in fact a lesbian. After the divorce, Kitty, who was extremely reliable and hardworking, started working in clerical jobs. But being a self-assured and motivated person, she found her job as a secretary too unfulfilling and quit. By the late 1960s, she started working as a bartender. Again, because of her headstrong personality and the fact that she worked really hard, she made roughly $759 a month, which is about $6,800 a month today. She couldn't be happier, because you see, Kitty had a dream. She dreamed of opening her own Italian restaurant, and she was saving all her money to make that dream come true. It seemed like things couldn't get any better for her. But on March 30, 1963, her life did become better when she met Mary Ann Zelonko at Swing Rendezvous, which was an underground lesbian bar in Greenwich Village. The couple fell fast in love and decided to move in together, so they began the apartment hunting phase. They finally found an apartment they both loved. It was a second-floor apartment in a 2-story building next to Long Island Railroad in Kew Gardens, Queens. And soon, that apartment became a safe haven for both of them. It became a place of love, somewhere they could just spend time together and be who they really were. Kitty couldn't be happier. But to understand the case, we need to go back to the night of March 30, 1964, exactly a year after Kitty met Mary Ann. Kitty, just 28 years old, was now the bar manager at Evie's 11th Hour Bar in Hollis, Queens, and was working double shifts and putting all her savings towards realizing her dream of opening her own restaurant. She was in an amazing relationship with her loving girlfriend and had a great income and job. Things were good. On that fateful night, she was driving home from work. It's 3 a.m. and the streets are quiet. Kitty parks her car and walks towards her apartment, but someone is following her. That someone is Winston Mosley, a man who, on the surface, seemed ordinary, a married man with 3 children at home, an appliance repairman. But in reality, a predator. Mosley had already killed 2 women before that night, and as he spotted Kitty, his dark intentions locked in. As she's walking to her apartment building, Kitty feels like someone is watching her, following her. She starts walking faster while she's digging in her purse for her keys, but as she starts walking faster, she hears the footsteps behind her speed up too. It was no mistake. She was in trouble. Kitty's apartment was just 100 feet away when Mosley lunged at her with a hunting knife. He stabbed her twice in the back, and Kitty screamed, quote, "Oh my God, he stabbed me. Please help me." End quote. And here's where the infamous part begins. Lights flickered on in nearby apartments. A man reportedly shouted, quote, "Leave that girl alone." End quote. Mosley backed off, briefly. Kitty, bleeding and terrified, stumbled toward the back of her building, trying to find safety. But Mosley wasn't done. He returned 10 minutes later, shadowing his face with a wide-brimmed hat, found her in a secluded doorway, and attacked her again. This time, the assault was even more brutal. He stabbed her repeatedly, raped her as she lay dying, and then stole $49 from her wallet before fleeing. By the time help arrived, Kitty was gone. She died on the way to the hospital. And here's the gut punch. The media reported that 38 neighbors heard her screams and did nothing. It was the birth of the bystander effect, a psychological phenomenon that suggests the more people witness an emergency, the less likely any one of them is to help. You've probably heard the term before, right? The case became a cultural symbol, a morality tale about urban indifference. But was it true? Let's peel back the layers. First of all, the number 38, that's a stretch. Police reports and later investigations show that fewer people actually witnessed or fully understood what was happening. Many heard noises but didn't realize they were cries for help. Some thought it was the voices of people coming from a bar, some thought it was a lover's quarrel, and some just thought it was drunk people yelling at each other outside. And you've got to think about the time. This was the early 60s. People were less likely to interfere because they trusted the police to handle things, or feared retaliation. Some did call the cops, but the response was slow. Also, let's talk about Kitty's location. The attack happened in two separate areas. When Mosley first attacked her, she was on the street where a few people may have seen or heard. But when he came back, it was in a dark, isolated hallway. No one could have seen what he was doing. Only one neighbor knew that Kitty was stabbed during the first attack, and only one other neighbor was aware of the second attack because he heard noises and cracked open his door and saw Kitty lying on the ground still alive and trying to talk and ask for help, while Mosley was still stabbing her. He called friends asking for advice, to which they replied, quote, "Don't get involved." After which, he climbed out of the window of his apartment and went to a neighbor's and called the police. Add to this the fact that Kitty's lungs were punctured during the first attack, which led to her death from asphyxiation, and so Kitty wouldn't have been able to scream. The attack took approximately half an hour, and the wounds in Kitty's hands were indications of self-defense, which is truly heartbreaking. A neighbor, Sophia Ferrar, did find Kitty shortly after the second attack and held her in her arms, whispering, quote, "Help is on the way." Kitty was picked up by an ambulance at 4:15 a.m., but it was just too late. She was buried in Lakeview Cemetery in New Canaan, Connecticut. The police started questioning the residents at 7 a.m. the following morning, and Kitty's girlfriend, Mary Ann, was questioned for 6 hours when the interview focused basically on their sexuality and nothing else. The police believed she was a suspect, even though people reported seeing a man, and the fact remained that Kitty had been actually raped. 6 days after the murder, there was a suspicious man with a TV in his trunk who claimed he was with the movers, but after a neighbor confirmed that the actual neighbor was not moving anywhere and just wasn't home, the man was arrested. A detective recalled that a white car similar to this burglar's was reportedly seen by the witnesses of Kitty's murder and connected the dots. The burglar, was none other than Mosley, who was in fact Kitty's murderer. Winston Mosley was born on March 2, 1953 in Manhattan, New York. He, as mentioned earlier, was a married man and had 3 kids. He was only 29. Apparently, this guy had no criminal record, but it was later found that he was also guilty of the SA and murder of 2 other women and many burglaries. It was later discovered that he was a necrophile. When asked what his motive was for the attack, he simply said, quote, "to kill a woman," and then added that he preferred killing women because, quote, "they were easier and didn't fight back." The story is, Mosley got up at around 2 a.m. that night, and while his clueless wife was working the night shift as a registered nurse, he felt like killing a woman. So he started driving through Queens to find a victim. He was sitting in his parked car when he spots Kitty sitting in her car behind a red light and follows her home. It's tragic and horrifying, but the reality is that the narrative of 38 witnesses was largely sensationalized. It sold papers, it made the story unforgettable, but it also overshadowed who Kitty really was. Kitty wasn't just a victim. She was a vibrant young woman with big dreams. She loved her girlfriend Mary Ann and had plans to one day open her own Italian restaurant. Friends described her as kind, sharp-witted, and full of life. She was self-assured beyond her years and had a sunny disposition, as some described her. People at school remembered her as a very good student who was voted class cut-up. She was talkative, energetic, and very popular in school. And let's not forget the bravery she showed that night. Despite the unimaginable terror she faced, she fought to survive. Kitty's story is not just about her death, it's about her humanity. So where does that leave us? The Kitty Genovese case remains a turning point in psychology and urban studies. But maybe the real lesson isn't just about the bystander effect. It's about the stories we tell, and why it's so important to get them right. However, it is interesting to note that a series of scientists were asked why people fail to help a person in distress, and none could offer an evidence-based answer. But the monster of this particular story later explained, quote, "I knew they wouldn't do anything. People never do," end quote. Today, Kitty's legacy lives on in more ways than one. Her case inspired Good Samaritan laws, which protect people who step in to help others. And for all its flaws, the story has made us more aware of our responsibility to act in the face of danger. Up until the late 1960s, there was no centralized number to call in case of an emergency. But Kitty's murder was one of the factors that pushed for the emergency 911 system to be put into place. In the aftermath of the crime, Mosley was sentenced to death and showed no emotion or remorse, while some applauded and cheered. However, his sentence was later reduced to life imprisonment. He was charged with Kitty's murder, but not for the murders and assaults of the other 2 women he'd confessed to. He died in prison at the age of 81 in 2016, having served 52 years. Mary Ann died in 2024 at the age of 85. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Kitty Genovese's story. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and tell us your thoughts. And remember, folks, it only takes one voice to break the silence. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time on Crime Alley Documentaries. Please leave any theories or comments you might have for us down below. We're really interested to know what you think about this case.